We all have aspirations, whether it is funding our kids' education, creating a retirement corpus, or a dream home. We need to have a plan to achieve those goals. How can we go about helping our clients figure out whether this investment in a Marcellus product or a particular portfolio actually makes sense for them?
We usually refer to goals in terms of life goals, right? Something that we want to achieve in life. What's important is to turn those life goals into financial goals. The wealth that we create today is the means to an end to achieve those goals. One goal which I believe is common for all of us is retirement, right? Your children's higher education, be it Indian or international, it is inflating at 2x of the normal inflation rate that we see. For an American education, for example, anywhere between 50 to 60 lakhs a year.
India is one of the most indebted economies from a household borrowing perspective. And a lot of it we see is the growing consumption culture, particularly the Gen Zs. They live for the day, borrow from the future to spend for today. I'm not sure there's any savings happening at all.
The key levers don't really change. For them, the time starts now. The most important of all, how much time do you have for your wealth to sort of grow and compound, for it to become meaningful down the line?
I guess while the principal and the interest rates are more multiplicative, N, which is the time period, is exponential.
Exponential, that's correct.
Hello and welcome to Marcellus Musings, next episode of the podcast. My name is Pramod Gubbi. I'm your host. I tend to speak to some of my colleagues on various topics of interest in this series. And today's topic is something to the core of Marcellus's existence. As many of you might know, Marcellus' purpose is to make wealth creation accessible and transparent. In some ways, we do exist to help our clients fulfill their financial aspirations, and that's really our place under the sun. And this topic is largely concerned with financial planning and asset allocation. At the end of the day, there has to be a plan to achieve your goals. We all have aspirations, whether it is funding our kids' education, creating a retirement corpus, or a dream home, or a holiday destinations, or perhaps a philanthropic goal, so on and so forth. It's not enough to have these goals. We need to have a plan to achieve those goals. And there's a whole field of work around financial planning and asset allocation out there, which can help us towards achieving most or ideally all of these goals. To help us discuss this, understand the subject, I have with me my colleague, Manish. Manish is a co-founder of Marcellus and also our chief operating officer. In the role of chief operating officer, Manish has been solving a variety of problems for us at Marcellus. He's our go-to problem solver. So when we thought our clients are facing these problems, when they make an investment, they come in with really no framework or goal in mind. How can we go about helping our clients figure out whether this investment in a Marcellus product or a particular portfolio actually makes sense for them? If it does, what purpose is it meant to serve within the overall construct of their portfolio or financial savings? So Manish has been at it with his own personal savings. So given his problem-solving nature, we thought who better than Manish to solve this. So we brought him on board. He's created a construct. Some of you might be aware. So to start off, what I'd request, Manish, is if you can talk us through your own personal journey. Give us a little bit of background about yourself. Where did you grow up? What have you done in your career? And then if you can juxtapose that with what has your own journey in terms of personal finance or savings is concerned, and how did you solve this problem for yourself? And we'll come to how can we use that to solve that problem for our clients. So yeah, over to you.
Thank you, Pramod, for the kind introduction. And hi, everyone. Pleasure being here. Yeah, so my journey. So I was born in a small town in Madhya Pradesh. It's called Burhanpur. And I pretty much did my higher schooling over there. And I was born in a business family, so my father was a wholesale clock trader. And like most of us, essentially from grade six on, I spent a large part of my day after my school at my father's shop. And was very early sorted into the business side. So that's where and my first thing I was doing was bookkeeping, essentially, just making single entry systems. So my personal journey into these finances started pretty early on. Uh, but then we moved different places. So we moved to Gujarat, which is where I did my graduation. So I completed my graduation in commerce. And from there on, I in 2003, the family moved to Mumbai. My brother was into IT, and the first had just happened, and the phase two was coming in. So all of us moved to Mumbai, and here I again, after doing a couple of jobs for the first time, I left the family business and thought I'll gain more experience and work in some other alternate industries. So I happened to join a consulting firm called Fractal. They are into big data analysis. Again, my job was in accounting, but I was part of the team. It was a small startup, and that's where I happened to learn more about how to use data, how to think of data, derive insights and work with that. So that was my career into consulting. In 2008, just at the beginning of the global financial crisis, I got an opportunity to move to the UK. So I had a job in the UK, and I just moved in. And initially, the plan was to live 6 years, stay 6 years, and come back because my family was here. So that's how the plan was. But I ended up
Why
eventually,
six, Manish? What's the magic
yeah,
number? Why is it a magic number?
yeah. So the sixth was you get the citizenship in 6 years. So again, very
Oh,
commercially focused I was. I wanted to live offshore, so obviously it was a great opportunity. My brother was also there. Fortunately, that lasted long. I did really well. So for the first couple of years, I worked with some of the largest British banks. But then I started working for myself as an independent consultant. And in 2018, when I thought now, I've overstayed my journey, I wanted to move back. So that's when I thought, and fortunately, I saved, earned enough money as well. And so that's when the journey with Marcellus was, we were about to set up at the same time. So things converged really well. I was on anyway looking to do something of my own. So that's how the journey panned for me. I've done a couple of careers, a couple of roles, couple of geographies, but I'm back where I belong, and I really sort in my place. There are a few
well,
things that
starting
really,
off in the UK in the middle of the financial crisis must be the craziest thing anybody has done because from our journey, that's myself and Saurabh, we've sort of pivoted away from the UK around the same time for exactly
yeah,
the opposite reasons. As
yeah,
you might know, Saurabh used to be a financials analyst at Clear Capital, where I was a technology analyst, and he perhaps was one of the first ones to call the global financial crisis. Not the global one. His view was just around UK lenders, and he peered into their balance sheets to figure out the sort of risks. It was a precursor to the global crisis, which was the UK's mini version of the subprime crisis. For that call, we got a lot of recognition there, but it
yeah,
also scared the hell out of us, saying that we could see the British financial system getting broken, and we
yeah,
said we don't want to bet our futures there. So we pivoted to India on the back of that. How did
yeah,
you take this bold call of going into the chaos of the crisis that perhaps started in the UK in some ways?
yeah. No, it's a good question. I think the apt answer is ignorance. So bliss, right? So it wasn't really planned that way. So what the life stage I was at, I didn't have much, right? I was 24 years old then, and my essentially I got an opportunity. I thought, why not try it out? While the whole global thing was happening, and a couple of my colleagues then warned me that you're getting into a storm of sorts. I didn't think of it too much at that point, but I thought, what's the risk? I can go back, I can try it out, and worst case, I can come back. But it was pretty dramatic the day I joined. So I had joined a firm called Goldfish Cards, which was owned by Discover Financial Services. Now, Discover was an American financial arm. They didn't have a banking license in the UK. So the day I joined, the company folded. I was in the lift going up, and
Wow.
as soon as I was on the floor, I was told the portfolio has been acquired by Barclaycard, and there are all jobs are at risk. So that's how my journey pretty much started. It was pretty much correct from the day one. Again,
Wow.
in the midst of it, I was young. I didn't know much about what's going to happen. Uh, I thought let's see what happens, and I saw the British were happy because they knew they'll get paid the compensation, yeah, right, redundancy payments. Migrants like us, who seasoned folks, were worried what will happen to the career. I was actually trying to figure out, how should I react to this. But I
Yeah, I
somehow,
mean, that can be scary. I mean, that
yeah, yeah,
reminds me of my own move to Singapore in 2013 in the middle of the taper tantrums, hoping that I'll be able to service institutional investors there. I remember the first day, the first meeting was with a hedge fund. We decided to shut down. So I can imagine moving into a new country, uprooting your family in the middle of a crisis can be
yeah.
quite scary.
Yeah, yeah, that was so Lehman. My office was in bang in front of Lehman. I saw the Lehman going bust, and I saw all the folks carrying big boxes of documents out of the office. The Northern Trust had just gone off, so a lot of it happened. It literally felt like sitting in the cockpit of a plane that's about to crash. Because I was also on the 40th floor of one of the towers in Canary Wharf, so it was pretty dramatic. Something I'll remember for all time. And looking back at it, I can see how risky or what the situation was. And it actually, I was okay. I didn't think of it too much when I was there. Uh,
Phenomenal. I mean, that's in turn ties in with today's topic, right? Life is uncertain.
yeah,
The best plans can be dismissed without any warning.
yeah,
How do you sort of manage the risks or manage for
yeah,
this uncertainty, particularly in terms of your savings? What cushion did you have back then? I know when we are young, we don't really think about it too much,
yeah,
but it is increasingly the order of the day. Incomes and jobs are always uncertain, particularly in the world of AI and automation. So
yeah.
talk us through that. What were you thinking? How did you manage?
Yeah. So I actually uprooted my family twice. Once while moving back to the UK, and then the second while coming back from the UK. When I joined in, we were told we'll get some, a couple of months of, salary to, as a consultation, is what they call it there. So severance package, right? So I had some of that, and I thought I'll, at least have some cushioning to see that through. And I soon realized I'll have to look for another job because I didn't have a job. So I went pretty prudent on the expenses. I didn't sign any long-term commitments, and I aggressively started looking for a job. In my fortune, having that cushioning allowed me runway of a couple of months to see through whether I can find a job and continue to stay. Luckily, that worked out for me. So with that couple of months of cushioning, these days we call it emergency funds or something of that sort, I had it in the bank, which then gave me some runway to sort of see, if I'm able to find another role, and how that sort of turned out. Fortunately for me, Barclays acquired the portfolio, and they acquired a small part of the team, and I was one of those. So I was able to see that through. But having that cushioning was the reason I was able to sleep easy, because otherwise, I think financially it was okay, but the mental stress it caused, especially you have made a big change and went into an unstable environment. That was more from a tangible reason. It was from a psychological perspective. Was very. I was fortunate to have that and to be able to see this through.
Great.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I think that point that you made about the ability to sleep peacefully at night,
yeah,
um, there's no value that you can ascribe to that, right?
yeah,
So all this
exactly.
planning, contingency planning, emergency funds are for something as invaluable as that. I mean, in your case, you were at least single at that time, but this can happen to anybody with significant liabilities in terms of their responsibility towards their families, the family's future. So that can be a good segue into talking about the concept around financial planning. You've been
Yeah,
emphasizing all financial planning need to be linked to goal-based planning.
that's correct.
Just to get us a sense, what are the typical goals um, for us? People like us can plan for.
We usually refer to goals in terms of life goals, right? Something that we want to achieve in life, right? What's important is to turn those life goals into financial goals, because at the end of the day, money is the means to an end, right? The wealth that we create today is the means to an end to achieve those goals. That's the objective of why we invest and save today, for it to grow big enough to meet the life goal that you planned for, right? Uh, so when we talk about goals, one goal which I believe is common for all of us and all of our, for all the professionals, anybody's working, is retirement, right? Retirement is a stage. It's not a goal as in a check milestone, but it's a stage of life, right, where we go into stop actively working and get into the consumption phase of our life. And when I say retirement doesn't really mean stop working. Retirement, when we call retirement, essentially is working or essentially not obligated to work, right? And we may want to focus on our own interests. It could be anything which is
Not working for
beyond
the
work.
money, I
Not working for
guess.
the money, exactly. Yeah, not
Right.
working
You
for the
can.
money or the obligation for the money, but essentially to be able to do what we want to do, right? So there's one retirement when we talk about where we may retire from anything we do, but the other way to look at it is we never truly retire. We do something or the other all the time, right? But the idea essentially is to be free to be able to retire when we want. All right.
More
It's
financially
called
independent.
financial independence
Right.
is another word, right?
Yeah, because if
So
we look at our, one of the legends from our industry, Warren Buffett decided to step down as the chief executive of Berkshire Hathaway at the ripe age of 94. So
yeah, yeah,
retirement can be contextual in that sense.
exactly. Exactly, yeah. So that's one life stage, one goal I'll say certainly is relevant for all of us because the shape of our finances or the flow of finances sort of tilts from that point on. So that's one I'll say is one, and there are many, right? So so the definition I'll use is any life goal, anything that means a sort of a lumpy cash flow or a substantial amount of cash flow required to achieve that life aspiration, life goal, can be considered as a financial goal. For example, your children's higher education, right? So as we are seeing education, be it Indian or international, it is inflating at 2x of the normal inflation rate that we see, right? So uh, uh, when your kids graduate or get to the point where they have to study for their higher studies, internationally speaking or Indian speaking, this can be pretty substantial. It can run into for an American education, for example, anywhere between 50 to 60 lakhs a year. That's pretty lumpy, pretty meaty. So that's one financial goal which will again be relevant to most of our listeners. Uh, Buying a house is also one of the goals because the the house that you live in is more of a need, right? So at some point you would want or you might want to get your own shelter, own place where you live. So that can be, and because again it's a sort of a very it's a high cash flow sort of a goal. So buying a house can be one of the goals. Uh, Again, another thing that we see, getting married obviously is another one. So as a parent, a lot of when we speak with investors, so from their children's perspective, making them able, which is getting them an education, then getting them married, because again, that's everybody says it can be an expensive affair. Again, planning for that can be a financial goal. Another thing that we are seeing these days, a lot of parents do is something called a startup fund, right? So as the kids educate, they want to give them an X amount of money for them to either experiment, set up a business, or whatever they want to do. Essentially, get them started with life, right? So the launch pad of sorts. So that can be another financial goal. Retirement, we already talked about. Philanthropy is another one. In the later stage of the year, you want to leave something behind, so give something away. Right. Again, when we talk about it, it's actually it can be very vague, very wide, but we are able to translate it into a tangible number that can become a financial goal of sorts as well. So generally speaking, any life milestone which means a substantial cash flow incident for you, which should be your financial goal. And once we define it like that, then it enables us to give a structure to it and a path to get to that goal, or this bundle of goals. But it's important. All of us are different. Each of us have our own aspirations. Each of us have our own circumstances. So again, goal is while we define it like that, every individual will have a unique set of goals, right? So again, the planning for these has to be specific to each of us in conjunction with our own finances, which will again be varying from individual to individual. But when we talk about goals, these are some of the bits we should look at.
How should we think about these goals? there are dreams and then there are goals, right? So I might have a dream to say the most exotic holiday destination. Let's say space travel is a thing these days, right? It's quite expensive, but my means, or say the job or the career that I'm in, may not be in line with that. Or for that matter, you talked about sending your kids abroad for graduation outside. For a whole host of people in the country, they might still be a stretched goal. How can you help think clearly between dreams and goals?
Subset of goals, or when we say goals, essentially is the way you can think of it is there are some essential goals which are there, right? So you got to get your kids an education. That's essentially an essential goal, right? Where can you educate them? Where do you want to educate them? Can become a bit of a discretion on top of it, right? So the bare essentials, for example, retirement, right? It's another essential goal, because at some point you will stop getting that paycheck, or the earnings that you're getting right now. The degree of that retirement, what sort of comfort, what are you looking at that point? Is the discretion, or the value? How much do you need to that degree? That's the sort of second thing. So the way to look at it, and even within those, space travel, as you said, right, is something. If you have the runway, if you have the resources, the fortune to do that, why not? But this is something you can prioritize ahead of some of the other goals, right? That's the question. So the way to think of these is both in terms of necessity and aspiration, and also in terms of priority, right? I mean, another way I'll actually call having an emergency fund probably is the most important goal, because we are surrounded by uncertainty, right? We don't know what can happen. And when we talk about risk, right, risk is something which you haven't planned for. Otherwise, you would have planned for it, right? Similar with emergencies. So emergency funds are meant to be for something that you haven't planned for. So that's the most essential, most necessary goal, and hence the priority that would be the first one, sort of to figure out, or to sort of meet at. But that's the way we do help is, again, you can start with the whole laundry list, or the whole wish list of what are the bits that you want to do or want to achieve down the line, and then bucketing them into essential, non-essentials, and maybe prioritizing some essentials one below the other, one beneath the other, and so on. So that's the way to sort of look at it. And again, each goals will mean different, because we'll talk about a few of those bits in terms of when the goal occurs, or what's the value of that goal, right? All of those things sort of come to it. But yeah, clear prioritization is required, so that we don't jeopardize an essential goal for a non-essential, or a discretionary or an aspirational goal.
So you're saying there are must-haves and there are nice-to-haves.
That's correct.
Once you achieve your must-haves, then you can start pushing your nice-to-haves goal. Now let's
That's
think
correct.
about a situation where your current career, profession, savings, lifestyle means that even the must-haves themselves are at risk. Right? What are the levers available? I mean, simply put, the way I understand is you either increase your income, or you cut down your expenses, or improve the returns on your savings. How would you look at each of these levers? Which one is the most powerful? Now, obviously, income wise, there's only so much my qualifications, my experience can get. Now, of course, it's a different matter if I decide to take risks and start a business and hit a jackpot, but by definition, I'm taking risks there. How does one think about these levers?
Yeah. So essentially, there are three levers that allows us to sort of look at these or navigate these, right? So the first one obviously is how much you are saving today, or what's the accumulated wealth you have today, right? And but there's a limit to it, as you rightly said, that you can only reduce your expenses so much. If there's a scope, you should certainly do that. So how much can you save? How much do you save today? That's the first lever. The second lever essentially is the quantum of risk you take. That also coincides with your returns, but that doesn't mean there's a direct correlation between risk and return. So how fast your wealth can grow, that can be the second lever. But the most important of all, right, is the time. Right, is how much time do you have for your wealth to sort of grow and compound, for it to become meaningful down the line, right? I mean, as we say, compound interest, right? Compounding. The magic of compounding happens when you give it enough time for the compounding to manifest, right? And it's a long tail, it's a back end heavy of sorts. So, in other words, the longer the longer time horizon you have, right, that's the most important lever, which will amplify, right,
That's that. I
your
remember in
chances to
sixth
get to
grade, we
there.
were taught the sixth grade arithmetic class. The compound interest formula was, your amount is equal to the principal into 1 plus interest rate to the power of n.
Yeah,
I guess while the principal and the interest rates are more multiplicative, n, which is the
yeah,
time period, is exponential.
exponential. That's correct.
So that's the biggest lever. So does that mean that your ability to start off savings and investing very young is the
That's
biggest
correct.
lever available?
That's correct. So the longer you allow your wealth to compound for, all right, will have the largest impact. Which means the sooner you start on this journey, the better chances you have to have accumulated wealth down the line, because that's a natural. You don't have to do anything extraordinary there. Essentially, it's just starting soon and sticking to it in a disciplined way. I think that's as simple as that. You just have to let the compounding happen in time, without breaking or it unnecessarily, unless you really have to. So the sooner you start, the sooner you plan, the sooner you start savings and then investing, and let the compounding play out, the more stronger you are in a position to
Yeah.
essentially get.
I think that's a very powerful message and a very stark reminder of today's youth. I mean, you and I are in our 40s, but we see some of our colleagues in their 20s. And as our colleagues Saurabh and Nandita have been pointing out, India is one of the most indebted economies in household. From a household borrowing perspective. And a lot of it we see is the growing consumption culture, particularly with the Gen Zs,
Yeah,
where they have immense amount of faith in the future. They live for the day. In fact, they borrow from the future to spend for today.
right. Yeah,
We've heard several stories about this whole buy now, pay later, even funding holidays,
yeah,
and buying or living above your means. I'm not sure there's any savings happening at all.
yeah.
So your point about being able to fulfill your future dreams requiring a head start is important. But let's say somebody has lived that life and gotten into his or her 30s and 40s, and then your podcast said, "Oops, I've lost 20 years of savings. What can I do now?"
I mean, again, the key levers don't really change. For them, the time starts now, right? So essentially, where they are, you got to start from there, right? We would have lost a couple of years, or maybe 15, 20 years by the time we get there. But again, it's not too late in the sense that the same principles apply, from consuming today to saving today, whatever investments we have, how to continue to add to it. But at the same time, work with a plan. Work with a plan. Define the objectives. Define the goals, and have a plan in place. And then with discipline, sticking to that plan. Right. So if there are savings coming in, to begin with, ensure that we are saving enough today. Right. The discretionary expenses, the delayed gratification, as we talk about. If it can be pushed out, it should be pushed out. Avoiding debt, right at the outset, unless really really necessary. Avoiding debt, maximizing your savings, channeling them through to investment and sensible investments. Don't not taking disproportionate risk, but all of that with an end goal defined, which are the financial goals, and structuring, or sort of figuring out a path to get there, and with discipline sticking to that. So it may be a shorter window to compound, but it's still there, right? But with a plan, and now that we figured out, or we learned, that this was needed before, but it's still not too late. So the day one realizes, wherever they are, right? The day you figure out, you need to sort of move on from here. I think that's the point to start. So the whole plan-based approach, it's relevant at any stage. You have benefits if you start early, but certainly at any point, one needs to sort of look at planning becomes just as important.
Got it. So while the income piece is pretty much up to the individual's qualifications and experiences, and there's only so much you can do in terms of growing it. And the expenses piece, yes, frugality is important. Living within your means is important, but beyond a point, there's only so much you can do.
Which can do, yeah.
Let's move to the area where you can make a difference, which is the investments piece. If you've aligned your goals, you've done the best in terms of boosting your income, cutting down your expenses. How can you optimize your investments so that you are able to fulfill most of your must have and nice to have goals as
Some
well?
goals. Yeah. Yeah. Once you figure out the objective of what the goals are, what these investments are for, right? You classify them into must have, nice to haves, right? And then you go to structure them in terms of what are so the way we look at are the essentially three tiers, right? One is what do I need here and now to essentially cushion from any unplanned risk if it manifests right now. The second aspect to look at it is what are my goals, what are my needs that are going to manifest in the short term, right? Say next 3 to 5 years, right? And then anything which is beyond 5 years. The reason we have to look at in these three tiers is because the orientation of investments toward these objectives, these goals, right, has to be different based on the time horizon that they fall into. So something which we need for emergency. It's the idea essentially is that we need this needs to be really liquid, really available here and now. So the objective of my emergency funds would not be to give me substantial capital growth. Essentially, it is to be available for any emergency need that I get, right? Really accessible, maybe in minutes or hours, if not longer, if not shorter. Right. So that's one way to that's the first aspect of structuring the investment. The second is the short term goals. Now, as we see, right, short term are made up of are volatile. Right? All the sort of volatility and the risk sort of plays out. There's a noise in the market, and it all sort of affects the value of investments, right? So anything that is short term, we again the idea essentially is to protect the value of those goals from market risk or market volatility, because in short term there will be noise, and whatever investments you have, irrespective of what the investments are, will go through the short term noise. So that needs to be looked more from protection of capital perspective, right? And then anything which is in the long term, anything which is beyond 3 or 5 years, uh, because these goals are out. Again, the third lever, the lever of compounding, the power of compounding sort of comes in, and hence that needs to be structured for the long term risk-adjusted returns, or returns optimized for the risk. So that's the way to structure the goals, right? And the investments again have to be aligned to these three. Uh, Emergency need to be protected for liquidity, short term needs to be protected for market risk, long term needs to be optimized. Right. One common strand across these is our own psyche in terms of dealing with the risk, right? Because however much structure we give to this, we are in this for long. Wealth creation is a long-term journey, 50, 60, 70 years. It's a multi-decadal journey. All right. And it's a journey, it's the destination. There's no destination here. We got to live through this. And in all of this planning, the most important part essentially is, again, something we alluded to, is to sleep easy, right? So we have to enjoy the journey because the journey itself is pretty long, right? So whatever investments we plan, right, in terms of short, long, the risk that we take has to align to the risks that we are comfortable with. Otherwise, we end up taking disproportionate risks, which might give us sleepless nights, might not be worth it, even if it's for the long run, or it can put us in a precarious position. So, structuring it into these three sort of tiers or buckets gives us clarity in terms of how to sort of look at it, and we blend it with the risk. I think that's the most. So that's a structured way to sort of aligning your investments as well, and sort of to
So
get to the
that
long term.
the risk piece, I wanted to double click on it, right? I
Yeah.
mean, I guess so the last 20, 25 years, I must have filled a lot of risk profiling questionnaires. Sometimes I wonder, how should I answer those questions,
Mm.
right? To be honest, I myself don't know my risk appetite. How should one, because to be able to sleep easy is different for different people.
Yeah.
I can sleep easy. I'm blessed with good sleep, even if my portfolio is down 50%, but there could be others who could panic at a 10% drawdown. How can we become self-aware of our own risk appetite?
I think the question you're alluding to essentially is our tolerance to the risk. And the way to think about that is most of the risk questionnaires are hypothetical. They ask you what would you do in a given situation, right? The best way to essentially to see this is to look back and say, how did you feel about your investments in COVID, right, when the market suddenly crashed 30, 20 odd percent. More recently, the last 88 months have been a fair bit of a roller coaster ride. How did you think about your investments, in the last 8 years? Did it made you react? Even now, when we speak, the whole tariff war that happened or what's happening on the borders, right? Again, how does it make you feel? Are you comfortable? Or do you want to act on what's happening around you? So the best way to look at our own tolerance or our comfort with risk is to see in these past specific in the past when these events have occurred. How have you thought about your investment? Does it give you do you feel patient that it's a cycle or it's a small sort of jolt on the journey and will self correct, or does it push you to act onto it, right? So that's how that's one way to sort of see how your own comfort with the risk comes in, not theoretically but in real life.
Yeah. I mean, risk is generally uncertainty, right? And not necessarily downside risk. I've seen it play out the other way also in these 7 years at Marcellus, in my portfolio reviews with clients. I've seen the other way around as well. You've got a great first 3 year return, and then, as everybody knows, Marcellus went through a year and a half of very poor returns. There's a little bit of FOMO setting in, while your 4 year return was still in line with what perhaps you could have expected at the outset. The fact that you're not doing as good as your neighbor, these things are very human, and it's quite
Yeah.
possible. They say greed and fear are emotions which, if you can conquer, you'll solve the whole financial planning and
Yeah.
fulfilling your financial goals. How does one think about these emotional constructs when it comes to personal finance?
Yeah. So personal finance is as much a behavioral finance, if you talk about, right? Because while we claim human beings, we all claim we are rational beings, right? But we are predominantly driven by emotions, and emotions all around us, right? So whatever we see or are surrounded by has a direct or an indirect effect on how we react to it, right? So it's difficult. It's simple to understand and to appreciate, but it's actually difficult to practice. And I mean, you talked about extreme scenarios, right? But let me talk about a simple concept. It's called rebalancing, right? So one way to sort of look at a prudent portfolio needs to be rebalanced. But rebalancing essentially is if you have a certain allocation defined, and over time, the different investments in your portfolio grow at different rates. So, for example, you have equities in your portfolio, and you have a gold in your portfolio, and some debt, right? So over time, if in an equities bull run, your equities will become what was a 50% allocation could become a 60% allocation, right? So that's what you will see. Now, rebalancing suggests that you should trim the overgrowth in a certain in what has actually done really well, and invest back into the assets which haven't done really well. Right now, if you think of it, this is a contrarian approach. You are essentially saying what has done really well, I'm going to take a slice of it, uh, without applying actually any mathematics or statistics behind it. Right? You just take the overgrown portion and go and buy what has not worked well, because cycles will revert, and overall it will be beneficial for you. But what are the emotions here, right? That's the rational being. What is the emotional being saying? Emotional beings will say, I'm in the middle of a bull run, and you're asking me to take a cut from my equities and invest back in debt or gold for that matter, right? So it's not even an extreme scenario. It's a very standard thing that you do, in managing portfolios, right? Do it yourself is big challenge. Your emotional mind will fight with your rational mind, and probably you'll be an impasse and you might not do it at all. Right, and this is where you need a guide, a counselor, or somebody, an advisor, a trusted advisor who can help you navigate through these. Because when you are in the situation, you obviously are driven by emotions. But you have somebody alongside you, say a doctor, for example, right? They will give you advice which may hurt you in the short run, but it's right for you in the long run, right? For the medicines they give you, or the procedure they do. We can't do it for ourselves, and this is where helping us regulate the emotions or navigate these emotional roller coasters. That's where a role of a trusted advisor sort of comes in play. So that's something very to
Yeah.
do, simple but very difficult to do yourself, and somebody who can help along you onto this plays a critical role.
Yeah, that's an important point. I think when we were young, At least I used to think human beings are rational beings. But as I've grown up and seen my own decision making, which were not particularly rational at times, I've realized the power of Daniel Kahneman's work,
Yeah.
where he talks about behavioral biases, cognitive biases, and in some ways, there was a very famous interview when Kahneman was asked by this journalist, "You've done all this work on behavioral biases. How does one get over it?" He says it's impossible.
Yeah.
Even if you acknowledge it, you can't get over it. So we will remain emotional beings. In fact, you talked about the role of the financial advisor here. I did come across an investment advisor in the US. Um, the founder of the advisory firm, he doesn't call himself the CIO, the Chief Investment Officer. He calls himself the CBO, the Chief Behavioral Officer. And his point is the investment side is perhaps the easiest thing in terms of how much to allocate to equities, how much to fixed income, how much to gold, which funds to buy, which fund managers to back, are perhaps the easiest thing.
Yeah.
The hardest thing is to stop my clients from doing stupid things.
Yeah.
Essentially, he and all his colleagues are behavioral counselors. And that's a very, very important point, at least being aware that we are subject to emotional biases and we tend to make stupid decisions all the time. Is just being human. So the role of the financial advisor is important. Now, moving on to the easier piece, which is the asset allocation piece, you
Yeah.
talked about the three buckets,
Yeah.
the emergency, short term, long term. Now, which are the asset classes or instruments you would think would fit into these buckets, and how does one go about allocating across?
Yeah. So the heart of the asset allocation is diversification, right? Because and the idea of diversification, essentially, I mean, there are many studies done which explain that it's the allocation, not the stock or the fund selection, right, that dictates most of the returns. In fact, it's been quantified. So around 90% of the variance in a portfolio performance is determined by the asset allocation, which is how much you allocate to various asset classes like equities, income, gold, again, geographical diversification, and so on. And it's not a particular stock that you invest or buy that drives that variance. So diversification becomes is pretty central, and asset allocation essentially drives onto that. Now, when we talk about what asset classes, so again, the idea here is to invest into uncorrelated assets to the extent possible, right? So that uh, any direction, any trend, any market cycle that affects one asset class, if it doesn't affect the other asset classes. So take an example of gold and equities, right? They usually go hedge to each other. They usually go in the opposite direction, right? So when there's an equities bull run, as the markets are stable, gold sort of doesn't do that well, right? So that's the hedge sort of brings in. So the idea essentially with an asset allocation is to essentially get to the set of uncorrelated assets. Now, when we talk about it, obviously, equities is one critical asset class. Again, here it's a diversified equities, not a very concentrated equities you're talking about. So that will be one major part of any asset allocation. But even within equities, again, you should look at diversifying across geographies. So while Indian equities are developing markets, they give us exposure to. I mean, we understand India really well. We are part of the country, so we have much more confidence. We understand the businesses here. So that gives us the growth that comes with any developing economy. Right. But on the other hand, we should also consider global equities, which are developed market equities, right? Mostly. So, for example, the American markets, European markets, and so on. They again bring the element of growth from equities perspective, but again, we benefit from global innovation in the currency because most of these are traded in non-Indian, not in INR, predominantly in US dollars and euros. So it brings up the diversification on the equity front. So when we think about equities, which is one of the key asset classes, diversification within Indian equities and global equities is one way to look at. The other ones, critical ones, are obviously debt and income. So these are your fixed income sort of assets, which gives you stability. They're not really volatile, but they are stable. They give stability and also churn in some cash flows, which can be utilized to minimize the deviations or the rebalances. So that's the second critical asset class. Third one is gold. We look at gold because by and large, you've seen over long term, and we are, I think we all would have seen charts recently where on 20-25 year basis, gold has essentially done the same as equity, but the journey has been quite different. Right, so the lack of correlation between gold and equity essentially it makes it an uncorrelated asset, and it should be part of any given asset allocation. So those are the key critical asset classes when we talk about Indian equities, global equities, income, and sort of gold. And within Indian equities, given it's a wide spectrum, there are around 4,000 listed companies. Diversifying within various caps and investing styles to the extent possible. Again, that's how to look at it. So four key asset classes, and then there are for diversification within them. That essentially gives us the set of loosely correlated and uncorrelated assets to invest in. The idea is over long term, all the market cycles will play out. Each of these asset classes will be related to or will drive in a particular market cycle. But over long term, all the cycles do play out, and hence it reduces the drawdown risk at a particular point in time. But over long run, you get the results at an aggregate, which you expect from these. So the risk-adjusted returns are much far superior when you do a diversified multi-asset portfolio compared to any other portfolio that you sort of build.
Yeah, I mean, you make an important point in terms of diversification across uncorrelated assets. I used to think diversification is meant for risk reduction. And given that we've been taught that high returns and high risk go hand in hand, the moment I think of risk reduction, I also think that return is being compromised for. Until I came across, we did study Harry Markowitz in university, but it didn't really occur. It was more formulaic, but I came across a quote which was attributed to Harry Markowitz. For those who are not aware, he's a Nobel Prize winning modern portfolio theorist. He's known for the modern portfolio theory.
Yeah.
And the quote is, diversification is the only free lunch in finance, when we were taught that there is no free lunch in economics. And it took a while to understand. I think the first time truly understood it is when our colleague Arindam published a newsletter on global compounding to show how the US and Indian equities had very low correlation. And he showed a theoretical exercise where if you had simply built a 50-50 US and India portfolio, just subjected it to annual rebalancing back to 50-50. Over 20 years, such a 50-50 portfolio, the risk measured in terms of volatility, as in having given you a smoother ride, but more importantly, it came without compromising on returns. Yeah. That is free lunch in my view. All of us would love to have that outcome where we are able to sleep peacefully at night, yet don't compromise on long-term returns. So US and Indian equities are one such uncorrelated pair. You talked about equities in general and gold. Are there other free lunches available in your perspective?
Yeah, so apart from the asset classes, it's also the styles, right? So we all are aware of value investing. Again, famous by Warren Buffett. He used to practice it early. So if you think about styles, so value and growth, right, or quality are essentially contrasting styles. And within equities, they have their own cycles. So there are periods when value does really well and quality is at the other end. And when the cycle reverts, essentially quality comes back and value goes through down. So again, diversifying within various styles of investing, various factors, right, that also is another free lunch or mini lunch, I'll say, which essentially cancels out the correlate, because they are uncorrelated, cancels out the journeys, and over long term, without compromising the returns, reduces the risk. And recently, our colleague Krishnan, if you remember, he did a blog post on the zigzag zog, where essentially you have two asset classes which are correlated, and the third one which has an inverse correlation in terms of the journey. And when you pair the two, essentially it gives you a much smoother ride. But in the end, essentially it delivers the same sort of result. So that's the power of identifying and essentially pairing up uncorrelated assets. It makes a substantial difference in terms of risk, but not compromising at all on returns.
A fair point. I think The concept is important to understand. I know there are a lot of critics out there who say that, when you give such studies about returns not being compromised, but rebalancing always comes at a cost in terms of transaction costs, taxation, and so on. But it's sort of missing the wood for the trees. Essentially, the concept of diversifying across uncorrelated assets is still a value creator from a long run. Um, but how would you think about the ideal period for rebalancing? You know, Ideally, I can rebalance every day. For every small
Yeah.
move in equities, I can bring it down. But
Yeah.
obviously, that's not fruitful.
Yeah, so I mean, the way to think about rebalancing instead of a period, we should look at the deviations, right? So, if, for example, you have your allocations across these various asset classes defined, all right, so long as there's no deviation in allocation, assume all the assets are growing at a rate which doesn't deviate too much. You don't really need to rebalance, right? You need to be aware, you need to review, but you don't really need to rebalance. Uh, if you do have to, again, the idea of talking in Indian sort of context, right? An annual review and rebalancing slightly over a year essentially makes it a bit more tax optimal because you avoid the short term gains tax if there is a tax incidence. It's over the long term. And you can compute whether the benefit of rebalancing outweighs the cost as well, right? So you can be a bit more smarter about it rather than blindly rebalancing every quarter, every day, or whatever frequency you think through. So there are ways and means to optimize it, where you do it only if it's needed and do it to the extent it's needed, and again be a bit smarter about what is the cost and what are the is it meaningful enough. So that's the way sort of to look at it. That doesn't have to be mechanical. If you sort of, you just don't have to just do it just because it's been 3 months or 6 months.
Great. I mean, this has been fun. Thank you so much, Manish. And I think what you're doing is as good as an essential service in terms of how it helps people live a fulfilling life in terms of fulfilling their financial aspirations and so on. While you said that the science itself is no rocket science,
Yeah.
it is more behavioral, and therefore, whilst on paper most of us can do it ourselves, um, we need a third party. We need a coach or a mentor of sorts who can stop us from doing stupid things. We need let's put it as a counselor. So yeah, I mean, I hope a lot of people take up your counseling service and do good to themselves. All the very best, and thank you. Thanks for coming on Marcellus Musings.
Thank you, Pramod. It was a pleasure.